Hi there and welcome back to MassiveSynth.com tutorials. This is the fourth and final installment of the Deep House series we've been doing this month, and for this tutorial we're going to make a Deep House Pluck like I played for you there in the intro, and also got some automation going on this pluck to just give you an idea of how it might work when you're using this in a track. So we can start off by creating a new sound in Massive and go straight over to the oscillator section. So for oscillator 1 we're going to use a square saw 2 wave and keep the wavetable position all the way to the right. Intensity can stay on full and the amp can stay on full, and we're only going to be using filter 1 for this sound, so you can drag the slider all the way up to the top. So you just route it straight to filter 1, and the pitch is going to come down to minus 0.04 just to detune it ever so slightly. So just a simple saw wave at the moment. Turn on oscillator 2, and this is going to be a pulse width modulation wave, a VA PWM, and keep the pulse saw position all the way to the right, pulse width all the way to the right, and bring the amp down to just below halfway. Again, route this to filter 1. So it's just adding a bit of a phasey sort of quality to the sound, and then pitch this a couple of cents in the other direction, so it's 0.04. Just detuning those oscillators slightly to help give us a thicker, more rich tone. So next we can go over to the filter section, set the filter. So I'm going to use a screen filter for this sound, and I'm going to pull the cutoff right down to the bottom here, to all the way to the left for now. Keep the scream halfway and resonance pull down to 0. Make sure the level of the filter is full, is at the top as well. So we're not going to get much sound now because we've got the cutoff right down. I'm going to start modulating that cutoff now though. So go over to the envelope section here, or envelope 1, and we're going to have a sort of plucky sort of envelope really to modulate that filter. So drag the attack all the way to the left, keep the level on full. You can pull the decay down to about a quarter of the way up, and the level or the sustain all the way to the left, and the release can stay about a quarter of the way up like that. And then what we want to do is drag the crosshair of this envelope 1 to the cutoff frequency, drop it in the first box there, and just drag the modulation, click and drag up, drag the modulation amount all the way to the top. So we've now got that sort of plucky kind of sound. To turn the level up a bit. So next thing we could do to add a bit of interest to that modulation that we've made is to add some velocity values, or click and drag the velocity in the macro control here and drag this to the second slot of the cutoff frequency, and then if we click and drag up now, we're getting some different kind of cutoff frequency values depending on how hard or how soft we hit the keyboard. So if you have a riff like this with different velocity values, you're going to get different sort of frequency kind of amounts as you play a riff, which is quite cool to give the sound a nice bit of variation really. So I'm going to drag it to around about there, just so it's just before the C basically. So it's just quite subtle, but it's given some variation on that kind of riff we've got playing. So the next thing we could do really is set up some of the effects just to bring the sound to life a little bit. So for the first effect I'm going to have a delay synced, pull the dry wet just before halfway, push the damp up a little bit so we're hearing a bit more top end in that delay, and the feedback can go right up to about 3/4 of the way. And then I'm going to change some of these values here. So for the left delay channel I'm going to go 3/16, and the right I'm going to keep 1/4, and this is going to give us quite a nice stereo delay with the sound. Next up I'm going to set some reverb in there and just pull the dry wet down a bit to about 1/4 of the way. pull the size down to just before halfway, and then push the density and colour up so it's quite nice, bright and smooth reverb. Pull the dry wet down a little bit further just so it's a bit more subtle. And add some EQ, just put some top end in there and just boost some of the higher mids. And I think that's it for the effects really. Next thing we could do is we've set the modulation envelope here, the filter modulation envelope. Also we could do a similar thing with the amp envelope and just push the attack all the way to the left so it's quite nice and sharp, and keep the level on full. Decay can stay around halfway, and just pull the sustain right down. So we've got an envelope like that, so once the sound passes through the filter and to the amp envelope, it's still staying quite plucky. If we were to open the filter, it's still quite tight if you didn't have this envelope set like this. You had a lot of sustain, you'd lose that plucky element, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we're doing a deep house pluck, so we want it to be quite short and not have much sustain on there. So we can now, I've got this automation set up here on the first macro, and so I want to get rid of that vibrato macro and change this to macro to be controlling the filter cutoff here. So if I can click and drag up there, I've got this, I can rename this filter. So this is now, that's now actually controlling the cutoff frequency. And then we've got this automation drawn into, so you'd have an idea of how the patch would sound if you were using it in a track and automating it. So another thing we can add with the sound to increase the top end and the brightness is a bit of white noise. So I've got the noise oscillator here, it's turned on. I'm going to keep it on white noise, keep the colour all the way to the right, and the amp can be modulated with an envelope as well. So it's going to have the same volume envelope as the rest of the sound basically. So I can route this to filter 1 again. And we're probably getting too much white noise in the sound now, but I can control this by using the sidechain feature here. So if I get this macro, macro 2, drag this over to the second modulation slot on the noise, and then hit the sidechain feature, hit the up button there, and so basically what this is activated now is this second macro is a volume control for this noise. So now we're not getting any noise at all, but we can actually control the level of noise we're applying to the sound there with this macro by activating the sidechain feature and using that as almost a volume control for the noise. But we've also got this envelope modulation on there, so it's nice and tight with no sustain. So another thing we could add with the sound is the final macro, and this is to control the shape of the envelope modulation. So I'm going to do this third macro, is drag it over to the decay slot on envelope 1 that's modulating the filter, and also to the level or sustain, and click and drag up on the sustain level here to around about, just so it's just before the L, and then we've already done, and then do the same on the decay all the way up. So now pull that noise down a bit. So it's just a kind of further thing with the sound really. We can control the kind of envelope shape with this one macro that's just bringing both of these levels up with just one knob basically, which is pretty cool. And Another thing we can do with the sound is just give it a few more voices. Keep it as polyphonic, so if we wanted to do chords with it, we can. Pretty cool. Now we've got 3 voices. And another thing I did with the sound, I don't normally do this with kind of deep or techie sounds, but I checked that box there to restart or re-trigger all the phases, just so we've got a bit more consistency. It kind of gave it a nicer, more solid tone to just have this box checked. So right then, one last thing with the sound, or we can add a bit of feedback actually. So turn the feedback on and just push the amount up to around 1/4 of the way, and on the insert 1 add a bit crusher just to give the sound a bit of kind of more crunchy kind of edge really. So keep the dry wet around halfway, pull the crush down to about 1/4 of the way, and just hit that insert 1 there, just so. So it's having an effect on the sound, but we want to keep it relatively subtle really, don't want to destroy the kind of harmonics. So and there we have our sound, a sort of deep house pluck that works quite well when you apply quite a lot of automation to it. So okay, so I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I hope you found it useful. Any questions, then please get in touch. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.